Kania, please introduce yourself briefly and tell us what is your take on the Indonesian nickel industry in your research in particular?
Okay. Hello, my name is Kania Guzaimi. You can call me Kania. I am from Indonesia. I am a doctoral researcher at FAU Erlangen-Nürnberg, focusing on business and human rights. My background is political science and international relations. And yeah, in terms of the mining in Indonesia, I think that there is potential, but at the same time, there's also risks. And in terms of my research focus on business and human rights policy in Indonesia. How is that policy developed? And specifically focusing on the relations between the state power and business power. So the state-business nexus. And yeah, I think it's really important to look the relations between the state and the corporations because yeah, there's many issues there.
So you mentioned the business and human rights. What exactly is that? What no one knows about what this term means?
Okay.
What does this mean?
Okay. So business and human rights it's not really a new thing. So it has been adopted by the United Nations in 2011. So we call it United Nations Guiding Principle on Business and Human Rights, which talks about how businesses should also have responsibility towards human rights, but focusing on the respect side. So, which is more of like a mitigation way for businesses to not harm people or communities when they operate, when they conduct business operations. So one of the ways is to conduct human rights due diligence, and yeah, so that's a little bit about business and human rights.
So in your research, you particularly look at the business and human rights presidential decree in Indonesia. So what exactly are kind of the current developments around business and human rights in Indonesia in particular?
Yeah, so in 2023, finally the government established the Presidential Decree on Business and Human Rights, which is the national strategy on how to implement business and human rights in Indonesia. And it's more of like a plan of what the government should do in terms of this. And it is translated also to the regional government level. So that's a bit different from the other national action plan on business and human rights from other countries. But again, this is not mandatory and there is no enforcement. So it is still more of a plan, but at least they are taking it somewhere. Like that.
Okay. And so when you're looking at the mining industry in Indonesia in general, what would you say are kind of the current political directions and the strategies that are enforced there? Also maybe in terms of, moving towards green transition or the energy transition.
Yes. In terms of the mining, the government is really focusing on the downstreaming policies. So to make sure that we don't just export raw materials, but to add value to the material. So it's so that the communities or the national could all, I mean, like the, yeah, sorry. So that the country could also benefit from its raw materials instead of just giving it right away to exporting it abroad, like that.
Yeah, and well, we all know that mining and extraction of raw materials comes with a lot of impacts on the environment, on the people living there, on kind of the social structures. Where do you see the current state of Indonesia when it comes to these kind of things and how politics deal with them?
So first of all, I think if we look at it from a climate crisis point of view, I think there shouldn't be any mining activities because, well, we know if we take a climate crisis seriously, then I don't think this renewable energy is kind of renewable in that sense, because I mean we are still extracting raw materials from the earth and destroying it. So I don't see why it's considered renewable. Although I know it's the battery can be recycled and everything, but there's a lot of already carbon footprints there and carbon emission when you mine the nickel. For example, in Indonesia, there's like a huge focus on the nickel, and yeah, and then we can see also a lot of, but now I mean we cannot really with the condition right now, the economy, with the kind of like the pressure to grow as a country, there's kind of like no going back, like no stopping. It seems like the government is really trying to become a developed country, and then there is a lot of affected communities at the same time, and not only the communities, also the oceans is becoming contaminated. There's a lot of toxic waste, and it also the working conditions also for the workers are not good. Like I think there has been a few explosions in the mining activities for the past few years in Morowali in Indonesia there. So yeah, I think I don't know. It's hard, yeah, to say.
Yeah, so and going back to kind of the business and human rights aspects of this is obviously kind of looks at the corporate actors in mining. So can you maybe tell us a little bit about the corporate landscape of mining in Indonesia? So who's operating there? Are those like local companies, or are those from the global north? And what are kind of the ownership structures there? So we get an idea of that.
Yeah, in terms of mining, there are lots of multinational corporations from China, and then also from the US, I think, and also from the national conglomerates. So there is a lot of maybe I don't know oligarchs. I don't know how to say it. Yeah, in Indonesia, because lots of the politicians are actually also business owners. So there is a lot of conflict of interest there in terms of like the ownership and yeah.
And how do you see that developing in the future now that Indonesia is kind of, or Indonesian politics are kind of going, we're trying to kind of create policies that address business and human rights and kind of the responsibilities of corporate actors? What would be your outlook for the next years?
I think the government is still, I mean, the government and the businesses are working together in that sense, because there's a rise also in business politicians in Indonesia for the past few years. And so it used to be, because we were authoritarian country kind of in the 90s, and then now after reformation, there is kind of like a turn into more business people in politics compared to military people. So there is that connection. I see that a bit of a risk because like the businesses could control the government or control the policy for their own benefit, and for example, like if there is even economic growth in Indonesia, probably it's going to be only experienced by the elites, not their local communities. And yeah, so that's my opinion.
And based on your research, what you've done so far, what role do you think can corporations play in actually making the energy transition and mining more sustainable? Or are there even opportunities for that with these kind of policies?
Well, there is always opportunities. I mean, in we have to be. I think we have to be optimistic, even though it seems really dark. But yeah, I think there are opportunities for companies to actually do respect human rights, especially when they want to operate in certain areas. So to take consideration about so I think companies, when they do risk management, they always look at the risk for themselves, for the company. What is the risk of the company? But with this human rights due diligence, how do you say, concept, companies is kind of like required to look at the risk for other people, like the ones that might be affected by their business operations. And I see some companies taking seriously, and some also maybe not, or not there yet. And also with the, I mean, in the EU itself, there is the EU Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, which talks about this human rights due diligence, which makes it like a requirement for companies to conduct this sort of due diligence or risk assessment. So I think, yeah, that could be mitigated. I mean, there it could be like a way of mitigation or mitigating the human rights impact.
Mm-hmm. And then finally, from your perspective, what would be kind of your key message?
Yeah, even though mining industry creates probably there is a lot of environmental impact and the impacts on the communities, but I think there are also lots of communities who rely on it as their livelihoods. So even though, so I think maybe they could reconsider if wanting to buy some like electronics or something. You could do a little bit of research about where those the raw materials were sourced, and then yeah, see whether it's good or not for yourself.